April of 1961, a small island in the Caribbean decided it liked the red flag better. The country, being Cuba, didn't know that this was the single decision that would start an everlasting war with the United States of America. CIA's espionage, fall of USSR, and the latest fall of Venezuela, what has this small nation not faced? But it still stands tall to United States. Proudly. Foolishly.
But why? Why has this small nation decided to fight against the strongest country on the planet? And why is it in limelight again after 65 years?
I'm against, and let's understand why Cuba is the upcoming target.
It was around 1950, Fulgencio Batista, a US-backed dictator, was ruling Cuba. He took power in a coup, and then his regime started. Elections canceled, protests suppressed, and anyone who opposed him got either killed or tortured by the Bureau of the Repression of Communist Activities, BRAC for short. Batista essentially had a playground the size of a country all to himself, and he wasted no time handing it to the hands that fed him, criminals. Under his regime, he passed a law where if a person spends more than $1 million into a hotel or $200,000 into a nightclub, they can gamble with no background checks required. This was a goldmine for criminals. They can launder all their money in open daylight, and that attracted the exact people that needed it. Crime bosses like Lucky Luciano, Santos Traficante, and Albert Anastasia all came flooding in. They laundered millions of dollars, tax-free. All this benefited no other than Batista. He made millions through this. But criminals weren't the only one exploiting. Many US-based corporations flood in as well. By the late 1950s, Cuba has given 70% of its arable land to foreigners, 80% public utilities to US companies. Batista was selling every dust he could find. He was above all 9 quads. Until
the dream of turning Havana, capital of Cuba, into Latin Las Vegas and himself into a billionaire collapsed. The same people he put into deep poverty fought back.
It started with 3 men, Fidel Castro, Raul Castro, and Che Guevara. Fidel and Raul were siblings, while Guevara was an Argentinian doctor. Fidel was a master manipulator of the media. When they were hiding out in the Sierra Maestra Mountains with barely any troops, he tricked a New York Times journalist into thinking he had a massive, unbeatable army. He purposely kept his true political plans vague. He told the public he just wanted to bring back democracy and fair elections, which made regular middle-class Cubans and even the US government initially think, hey, maybe this guy isn't so bad. He made every single political and strategic decision. He was the one who kept the fractured rebel groups unified under his banner. While Fidel was being vague, Raul was as clear as you can be. He was a big-time communist. He was meeting KGB agents in Mexico, bridging USSR into Cuba. Raul was cold, calculated, and highly organized. He ran the rebel military camps with extreme discipline. If a guerrilla fighter stepped out of line, tried to desert, or betrayed the group, Raul was the one who ordered their execution. He kept the army terrifyingly efficient. Moving away from the brothers, Che, the Argentinian doctor, was working with their military, training guerrilla warfare, leaving no weak links.
Summer of 1958, Batista made a mistake he would forever regret. He sent 10,000 heavily armed soldiers into the mountains to wipe out Castro's tiny force of just 300 men. But they underestimated heavily. Instead of fighting them head-on, Fidel used guerrilla tactics. Che Guevara and Raul Castro set up ambushes in the dense jungle, cutting off the army's supply lines. Batista's soldiers, who were mostly young, unmotivated conscripts, panicked. They didn't want to die for a dictator's casino profits, so they started retreating in mass disarray or flat out joining the rebels. By December 1958, Fidel ordered a massive counteroffensive. He sent Che Guevara to capture Santa Clara, a strategic city right in the center of Cuba that controlled all the country's roads and railroads.
Batista sent a massive yellow armored train packed with 350 elite soldiers, tons of ammunition, and heavy weaponry to stop Che. Che and his small squad of rebels borrowed a bulldozer from a nearby school, ripped up the railroad tracks, and waited. When the armored train sped through, it derailed and crashed. Che's men attacked the train with homemade Molotov cocktails. The steel train turned into a literal oven under the intense heat, forcing the government soldiers to surrender in hours. The moment the armored train fell, the rest of the army lost all hope. Most garrisons around the country simply opened their gates and surrendered to the first guerrilla commander who showed up. When news reached Batista during his lavish New Year's Eve party in Havana that Santa Clara had fallen and the rebels were marching toward the capital completely unopposed, he completely panicked. At 3 a.m. on January 1, 1959, while the rest of Havana was celebrating the new year, Batista packed his family, his inner circle, and over $300 million in stolen cash into planes and fled to the Dominican Republic under the cover of darkness. After they finally won Havana over, they started fulfilling the promises to people, starting with lower fuel, which he started buying Soviet oil for. Cuba was essentially using American-owned oil refinery to refine Soviet oil during the Cold War. This alarmed the US, which they forcing those refineries shut. This made Castro take his army and seize the infrastructure since USSR was backing them. Those infrastructure were later nationalized. In response to this, Eisenhower pinched Cuban nerve. He refused to buy Cuban sugar, which were a major part of their economy. Eisenhower slashed down 700,000 tons overnight. This shows the rage well. And in response, Castro took down every single American-owned sugar mill, plantation, and electricity company that was on the island. And if this wasn't enough, Castro also seized every American bank in Cuba. By October 1960, the situation was as messy as it can be. US banned all exports to Cuba, which was devastating, but Castro, blinded by newfound power, was not standing down. He signed a decree nationalizing all remaining American property.
It was the ultimate game of geopolitical poker. Washington tried to starve Cuba of oil, Castro stole their refineries. Washington cut their sugar, Castro seized their banks. By the end of 1960, over $1 billion of American business was wiped off the map, and the US was ready to turn this economic war into a literal invasion. But behind the scenes was a different battle going on. The CIA secretly recruited top mob bosses like Johnny Rosselli and Sam Giancana, who had lost millions when Castro shut down Havana's casinos. The CIA supplied the mobsters with highly lethal poison pills. The mob successfully smuggled these pills to an asset inside a Havana restaurant where Castro frequently ate. But the plan fell through at the last second when the pills accidentally froze and broke inside a refrigerator. After which, they recruited 1,400 Cuban exiles from Miami and trained them and gave them the name Brigade 2506. And then they were sent to the Bay of Pigs in April 17, 1961. But the mission went sideways.
The entire operation relied on the US destroying Cuba's air force before the invasion so the ground troops would be safe. But right before the launch, President Kennedy panicked. He was terrified that the world would realize the US government was behind the illegal invasion, so he canceled the second round of planned American airstrikes. Because of this, Castro's fighter jets were left completely intact. What happened next is just brutal. The jets of Cuba swarmed the sky, sank the main supply ship of the brigade, and left the men stranded on the small island. The brigade fought for their lives, but in the end, they were crushed by Castro's army. After this, Castro asked USSR for nuclear protection, and as we know, the world was quiet for 13 days, after which US and USSR finally had an agreement.
But now it seems like President Trump has had enough of the small, terrifying island. Starting with Venezuela, they have already finished all the oil reserves Cuba had, and President Trump signed Executive Order 14380, which officially declared a national emergency. Under this order, the US began blocking oil tankers bound for Cuba and threatened to slap heavy import tariffs on any country, including allies like Mexico, that continues to supply the island with oil. The goal is to entirely choke off the regime's energy supply, and Trump even said, make a deal before it's too late.
This all feels like Trump administration is finally going to take out the problem, too small to be noticed. Cuba has had its run being a communist, but ignoring the threat it is to USA is an action I'm against.